And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3.
Ryan Metzler's top 100 games of all time. Some are good and some are bad and some are sublime. Ryan has a PhD, lost his Euro certainly. Felt his favorite, can't you see? So here's his favorite
Top 100 games.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Metzler here yet again, and today we're going to go through another 10 of my favorite games. Today we're going to count down from game 30 to game 21. Why don't we go ahead and get straight to it.
Number 30, Opera.
The first game on this list is going to be a game with a fairly unique theme, that game being opera. Now this is of course a game about managing various opera houses throughout Europe, each player trying to do so better than the other players, managing their own group of opera houses. Trying to get music and trying to hire various experts in order to further the positions of their opera houses and even build on more wings to their opera houses to make them better. Now, the first time I saw this game, I wasn't very interested, and that's because the theme of opera is not one that's too exciting to me. But I had a chance to play it on loan from Board Game Exchange. They sent it to me, and I was able to play it and review it, and then decided that I needed to have a copy in my collection. And that's because of a very unique, or a very interesting mechanic in this game, which is a budgeting mechanic. In the game, you are going to earn money, and you're going to pay that money to increase your budget. Bidding, essentially, to increase your budget. And whoever has the highest budget is going to take the first action. Now, you could be hiring an expert or some type of character in order to do something on your turn. And then each player, after you've hired that, has a chance to kind of follow along. They can kind of take a secondary action. It's not quite as good as the primary action, but they'll also have to do it after you. But after that, whoever's highest on the budget action still will get to take another turn. So if you're high above every other player, even though you spend some money as you budget down, you're going to still potentially have the chance to take multiple actions in a row. And that's kind of the part that plays out. You'll earn money, and depending on how much of that you want to spend on your budget, you can continue to take turns. I don't want to go into it too much, but essentially you're going to do this in order to try and get the various piece of music you want. Depending on what time period you're in or what portion of the game you're in, certain musicians will be more popular than other musicians, so you might want a certain composer to put together your opera early in the game, whereas late in the game they may not be as good. You'll want to expand your opera houses and have pieces of music by different people in various opera houses throughout the game. But essentially, it all plays out very smoothly. It has that very cool budgeting mechanic, and I just found it very interesting, which is why it earned position number 30 in my top 100 games. That's opera.
Number 29, Seasons.
Game number 29 is one that was released at Gen Con last year. Maybe it was Essen, but I think it was Gen Con, and that game is Seasons. Now, my box has seen better days because the game's gotten some wear and tear, but Seasons is a drafting and dice rolling game where you're going to get cards at the beginning of the game, you're going to draft them out, and then you're going to place them into 3 different piles. You're going to get one of those piles during each of 3 years of seasons, and the seasons will change, allowing you to do various different things, rolling different dice and generating different resources, and those resources will be what you use to play the cards. Each of those cards will allow you to interact with other players. So you'll maybe play out a card that gives you victory points each time that the season changes, or gives you victory points each time that a player plays a card. The interaction, or the interesting part of the game, is the interaction between the random resource generation from the dice, or semi-random resource generation from the dice, and the cards you play that affect the play of other players and how you yourself play the game. There are different strategies to take. You can try and generate victory points throughout the game, which are, moving yourself up the track as the game goes. You can try and go for endgame victory points by accomplishing certain conditions. Some cards give you extra points at the end of the game for accomplishing something. Some give you points during the game, and all cards are worth positive or negative points no matter what at the end of the game. So if you draft more point-laden cards, you can earn points that way. The game has a lot of variety depending on what you draft. There are expansions for the game already, or a expansion for the game already, which makes it even more interesting, and it just has a very smooth and very easy drafting mechanic that combines very well with the random resource generation, which earns it its position as probably my top drafting game on my list. I haven't checked, but I think it's probably the top drafting game on my list. Very quick to play. Very good with 2, not as great with 3 or 4, probably best with 2 in my opinion, but a very good 2-player game. Definitely check it out. That's Seasons.
Number 28, Mage Wars.
Now we have a game that's a fairly recent acquisition for me. And this is a customizable card game style of game, so a little bit like Magic the Gathering, but it's all going to be in a format where you can buy everything at once if you want to. That game is Mage Wars. Now, Mage Wars is a two-player game. You can probably adapt it in ways to make it more than two players, but essentially this is a two-player game at heart with one set of the game. In this game, each player is going to be able to build a booklet of spells. Those spells are going to be determined by what type of character you are, what kind of mage you have in the game. If you're a beastmaster or a warlock or a sorcerer, whatever the case may be, there will be certain types of spells you can use. Now these spells will be interchangeable, and you can actually choose spells outside of your range to use in your spell book, but those are going to cost you more of your points that you get for building that book. Once you've built the book, the game kind of goes from a deck building or a constructed deck type game to a miniatures game where you're going to use those spells in conjunction with a board to move your character around and cast those spells to try and destroy the other mage on the other side of the board. And that mage will, of course, correspondingly be moving around the board trying to destroy you and whatever other creatures you may summon. So you're going to be moving your mage around, summoning new creatures to try and attack your opponent, maybe casting a lightning bolt or a fireball. All based on the range on the board. But all of this plays out without miniatures. There are no miniatures in the game, it's all card-based. So it kind of keeps the cost down a little bit in that aspect. Not so many miniatures and expensive models to be moving around, but still gives you that awesome feel of moving around a battlefield, having the spatial element going on, but still, essentially a card game. So it combines one of my favorite things about collectible card games, or about card games where I can build that deck and plan my opponent beforehand, with the tactical aspects of moving around the board, and that's what earns Mage Wars position 28.
Number 27, Glory to Rome.
The next game that I have on my list is going to be one that I've touted the virtues of multiple times. First in a review of its original edition, now or before in its review of the new edition of the game, and now in my top 100, which is Glory to Rome. Yet another tableau building game. Now you've seen these in the form of Race for the Galaxy or Innovation, but this is the one that makes the top of my list. This is my favorite tableau building game, Race for the Galaxy. And this is a game that does this style of game very well. Now, again, in this game, cards are going to be what you use for essentially everything. Cards will be resources. Cards will be clients, which allow you to take actions multiple times. Cards will be the actions themselves. Cards will be victory points. And cards will be buildings that you build that will give you abilities throughout the game. So the game is really about trying to play an action that nobody else can use as well as you can. And when you play an action, everybody else has the chance to follow that action if they can match the card that you played from their hand, or if they have the clients that will let you take that action. Building up multiple clients will let you take an action multiple times. So if you do it properly, you can kind of take the same action 3 or 4 times to advance yourself in the game faster and faster. Now, in addition to that, you don't want to play out a card that you want to use for something else, because actions are also resources. Action cards are resources. You don't want to throw away a resource that you need just to take an action, especially if the action isn't more beneficial than the resource. Correspondingly, you don't want to throw away a building to use it as a resource if you really need that building's ability in order to win the game. There are various win conditions based on specific cards or based on known endgame conditions. Essentially, whoever best plays the game eliminates the ability of their opponent to pick up cards that they need, and of course scores victory points, is going to be the winner. And that's what makes Glory to Rome one of the best tableau building games in my opinion. This is one you should definitely check out, either in this edition, the black box edition, or in the original kind of cartoonier artwork edition. Both very good games, and one you should definitely check out for your collection.
Number 26, Stronghold.
If you've been following along my top 100, you've probably realized that I have an affinity for two-player games. That's because I live with my significant other, Andrea, and when we have 2 players, we tend to gravitate towards those two-player game styles. And this game is going to be no difference. This game is Stronghold. Now, Stronghold is, as I said, a 2-player game by Portal Games, and in this game, you are going to be representing either a castle or some monsters that are besieging that castle. You can play the game with more players, again, but primarily speaking, it's going to be a 2-player game overall. Now, one player, as I said, is defending the castle, and they'll be trying to set up fortifications, move their archers and their soldiers and their heroes around the walls of the castle, trying to prevent the monsters from breaking in. The monsters, on the other hand, are going to be running up from the ramparts. They all have goblins and trolls and orcs, and they're going to be trying to use these resources, these units, to move up, climb up the walls, and break through the walls of the castle in order to get in. And the whole point here is for the defender to prevent that from happening as long as possible, because eventually the attacker will break through. The victory points are going to be scored based on how long the defender can prevent that attacker from coming through. On the attacker's side, the attacker will be spending time units in order to do things, as well as spending some of their goblins, orcs, and trolls in order to build various different things like battering rams, catapults, trebuchets, whatever the case may be. Now, the more time that the attacker uses, they'll give that time to the defender. And this is what really makes this game interesting to me, is that the attacker can slow play it, not build as much, and give less time for the defender to kind of prepare. But they can also try and kind of use a lot of time, build up very quickly, but the defender will correspondingly get more time to prepare their defense, and it'll be harder for the attacker to break through. So it's a fine balance between trying to figure out, do you want more units, or do you want to quickly rush up there and do things, but give the defender a little bit more time to prepare. The game balances itself out very nicely. It does seem to be swayed a little bit in terms of the defender, but that really makes it important for the attacker to carefully plan and make sure that they're ready quickly to get in to the castle walls. Definitely check this one out. It's got a lot of moving pieces. It's all represented by cubes, but if you're into that type of thing, you like moving around wooden pieces, and you like tactical games with a little bit of an asymmetric play style, Stronghold is definitely going to be a game that interests you. It has one expansion already. Check it out, Stronghold from Portal Games.
Number 25, CO2.
The next game on my list is one that I talked about from my favorite games of last year and is now in my top 100. And that game is CO2 by one of my favorite upcoming designers, Vital Lacerda. Now this is a game in which you're going to be a activist for clean power, or a company trying to research and build clean power in order to keep CO2 emissions down, because we don't need more global warming. If you fail to, as a group, keep CO2 emissions down, everyone will lose the game. So there's a cooperative aspect to this game, and that, of course, is always an interesting aspect, but in the long run, each player is trying to win for themselves by scoring victory points. And you're going to score those victory points by accomplishing different combinations of clean power, by having the best expertise or the most expertise in different types of power, and at the end of the game having a lot of money, which of course is the idea of a lot of companies have the most money. Most companies, really. So the game kind of manages a cooperative with a competitive aspect, and you're trying to balance the two. You don't want to be too competitive, because if you do, everyone loses, but you don't want to be too cooperative, because then you're helping everybody else get ahead. That, combined with the cool theme of clean energy, which hasn't been done too many times, made it onto my top list. Also, because the game plays out in a very interesting manner. Each player is trying to first research, then kind of set up a project, and then convert that project into a power plant. But each thing you set up isn't yours. So if you set up something that's interesting to another player, you prepare them to build a specific type of power plant, they can jump right in and steal it from you. Now, that doesn't hurt you necessarily, but it's something that you prepared, you set them up for it, and now they're advancing because of it. And you get a little bit of a benefit for doing so, but you kind of want to try and plan it out where you can set up and build your own things. Figuring out when to jump in on somebody else's project is a very important part of this game, and has a nice cutthroat aspect in addition to the cooperative part of the game, which is a nice contrast. It plays out very coolly. It's got awesome cooperative, cutthroat nastiness. I don't even know how to describe the whole dynamic feel of the game, but you should just try it for yourself and check out my review. That's CO2 by Stronghold Games.
Number 24, Terra Mystica.
Terra Mystica is probably one of the hotter games of this year, and it was actually released last year at Essen, and if you were lucky enough to get your hands on it, you've had it for quite some time now. If you weren't, I think Z-Man just brought it to the United States not too long ago, and now you can go and play it. Terra Mystica is a game about building a connection of buildings out onto a board, and this board is going to have different types of terrain, and you're kind of limited to building on your own type of terrain based on what faction you have. But through clever play, you can manipulate the terrain to be your kind of terrain. So if it starts out as a desert and you have enough resources, you can make it into a forest if that's what you need it to be. And of course, then build on it. Now, in this game, you're going to have all kinds of different resources. You're going to have priests, and you're going to have power, and you're going to have money, and you're going to have workers, and you'll have everything going on in the game. And you're going to be trying to manage all of these. Moving power around bowls is going to be how you get stuff done. But you have to have the right power in the right places in order to spend it in order to advance yourself. Now, there are also going to be actions you can take out on the board, and planning everything correspondingly is going to be very difficult. You need to build more buildings and specific types of buildings to get priests, and priests will allow you to take certain actions. But you also need money in order to spend on this and that and the other thing. It's way too much to describe in a short 2-minute clip. But let me tell you the reason it's on the top 100. One, it has so many different types of resources that planning everything out, each game is going to vary a ton. In addition to that, there are 14 different factions in the game. Each faction has its own ability, and each of those abilities is going to change how you play. So that, combined with the different resources, combined with the actions of other players, is going to make the game incredibly variable. It's going to be incredibly replayable, and it's always an interesting game to play. As far as Euro-iness goes, it's very heavy. I would call it easily a medium to heavy game. One where you're going to be constantly thinking about what you need to do on the next turn, and you're always going to be upset that somebody took an action that you wanted to take. If that sounds cool to you, definitely check out my review where I cover the gameplay of the game a little bit better. But Terra Mystica, not only one of the best games of last year, but one of the best games of all time in my opinion. Clearly in the top 30. You should definitely check it out. I think Z-Man Games currently publishing it and available now.
Number 23, Dominion.
Not surprisingly, we now see Dominion on my top 100 games, and I have never reviewed Dominion because it's so prevalent within the gaming community. When it first came out, it was basically all anybody talked about, and it continued to be expanded with Intrigue and Seaside and Alchemy and Guilds, and now Dominion is done, supposedly. We're done with Dominion. There's been, I don't even know how many expansions, something like 8 expansions, and the game is complete. And I have all of it. I've continued to buy into it, and that's because the game offers an immense amount of replayability within a very easy deck building style. The game, I'm sure everyone has seen, is basically about building the best deck as the game goes on, using the money that starts in the deck, kind of thinning your deck to be what you need it to be, but buying more actions to propel you along, building this machine that allows you to generate more actions, more card draw, more money, in order to buy more cards, and eventually buy victory point cards. The theme is, it's not great. You're essentially buying more land. It works out okay. The idea is to generate money to buy more land. Cool, I don't care so much about the theme, but the way the game flows together, the way that you can build these engines, and the way that these engines are going to change somewhat each time because you always have a variety of cards. There are trillions or zillions or who knows how many different combinations of cards at this point because you only play with 10 of the available cards each time, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards available. At least a couple hundred now. So you draft these cards at the start, you randomly select these cards at the start, the game changes, and then based on what players are doing, the game will change even more. This is always true. You always have the randomness of the players, but the massive amount of variety from the way that you choose cards and then buy those cards and add them to your deck is great for replayability. As I said, there are usually several different strategies you can adopt. There's things like garden strategy, where just having a ton of cards in your deck is great. Or, big money strategy, which some players will argue is the predominant strategy in the game. Or just getting a lot of actions, getting a lot of card draw, and hoping to get more money in order to buy things. That's a strategy. Giving curses out. There's all types of stuff you can do in this game. It's so replayable, so accessible, and a game that I think you can sit down and teach to pretty much anybody, that it had to make my top 100 and thus made it pretty high up into my top 100 because we get it to the table a lot. Check it out if you haven't already seen it. That's Dominion from Rio Grande Games.
Number 22, Gifts.
The next game on my top 100 list is an abstract game, and it happens to be the namesake for my favorite series of abstract games. That is GIF, both the game and the series that I'm talking about here. In this game, or mostly in this series, each player is going to control a black or white set of pieces. In this particular game, you're going to be using those pieces to push them from the edge of the board onto the board, trying to create rows of 4 of your own pieces, or sometimes rows of 4 of your opponent's pieces, but mostly your own. When you do this, you're going to remove those 4 pieces from the board, taking them back. But on top of this, you're going to remove all pieces that are in a row with those 4 pieces. They could be your opponent's pieces, and that's going to capture those pieces. So you remove your own pieces to get them back, but you're going to capture your opponent's pieces to prevent them from going back to them. And how this plays out is that each player is going to continue playing until one player cannot put a new piece on the board. So it's important to return your own pieces and to prevent your opponent from getting theirs back by either preventing them from making 4 in a row of their own color or by capturing the pieces for yourself. And this is a little bit different than a lot of abstract games. It just plays until one person cannot move any further because you've limited them or because they've made poor play themselves. So you kind of have to balance keeping your own pieces, getting them out on the board so that you can cleverly make these rows of 4, but at the same time pulling them back at the right time so that you can continue to play the game. It's a very strategic game. You're always trying to set up positions where you can capture, but your opponent can't possibly move something out on the board to take pieces from you. I love the dynamic of the back and forth of how that plays out. And it's a very simple game with a very simple rule set with a very strategic gameplay style, and that's why it's made it so far up onto my top 100. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out. That is GIF from the Project GIF series.
Number 21, Yinch.
And right on the heels of GIF, we have yet another game from the GIF series, and that game is Yinch. Again, players are going to be using black or white pieces in order to try and outwit their opponent through clever play out on a board. This time, you're going to be placing rings out. Actually, these rings will start out on the board. You'll place them during the setup. And on your turn, you're going to place a colored piece, black or white, your own color, into one of your own rings, and then move the ring along the board, over pieces potentially. Each piece you jump over, the solid colored pieces, is going to flip over. So a white piece will become a black piece, a white piece. And what you're trying to do is make rows of 5 pieces of your own color. Now, when you do this, not counting the rings, of course, you make a row of 5 solid colored pieces, you're going to remove one of your rings from the board. The objective being to remove 3 of your rings from the board. However, each of these rings that you remove from the board is going to limit you strategically because you'll have fewer rings than your opponent, which gives you fewer play options. And so this balancing aspect of the game is what makes it more interesting to me than GIF. That's why Yinch comes in one position higher, is that the game kind of self-balances. The more that you accelerate ahead of your opponent, the fewer strategic choices you're going to have, and the easier it's going to be for them to create their own rows of 5 and remove their rings from the board, essentially coming back at a little bit of a catch-up mechanism. So in my opinion, that plays out a little bit better than GIF, where you can have a little bit more of a runaway leader. If that sounds good to you, you should check this one out. That is Yinch from the GIF series of games. And there you have it. That is another 10 of my top 100 games, counting down from 30 to 21. I don't know if anybody expected me to be such a fan of abstracts. If you follow along, you've probably seen that I have a little bit of an affinity for them, but I'm primarily a Euro gamer. Hopefully, as I progress along, I'll continue to keep your interest. I'll continue to show you some games that maybe you haven't seen before, and hopefully some that you'll decide that you want to try and pick up for yourself.